Welcome to another show of the Research to Reps Roundtable. I am your co-host, Dr. Coach Pat Ivey. With me are two amazing people, and we're going to introduce our guests. So first up is Dr. Ted Labrinidis. Ted, how you doing?
I'm doing outstanding today, Pat.
Awesome. Dr. Reimer, what's happening?
I'm doing great, and I think our guest today is going to give us a run for our money. Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm amazing. I'm happy to get to chat with the three of you.
Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are now and what kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, actually, yesterday I was referred to as an old man. So I've been at UNC for 12 years, but I like to think I still have my whole career ahead of me. So I've been here for quite a while, but I'm a full professor here at North Carolina Chapel Hill.
So for our listeners, can you tell them, as a professor that's related to sport and research and science, how all of that kind of works together in your mind and your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason I love to chat on podcasts is so I'm a research nerd. We do a lot of lab-based assessments, and Ted was giving me a hard time about the number of papers I've published, which is, it's a game to play, and I like to think I've played the game. But on the other side, to me, all of the research questions that we ask, my hope is that it has some sort of even a small application to performance and health. And sometimes that's a stretch, but the hope is that we have evidence-based practice, not necessarily just coming from my lab, but we're creating and evaluating research to hopefully improve the way we train individuals and we adapt the body more efficiently and effectively. Do I get to kick back now? Amazing. Okay. So one question I had, I've got to interact with most of you except for Ted. Ted's a bit elusive, as I mentioned. But one question I have, and you can see who answers first, is this what you wanted to be when you grew up? Like, you guys are all very impactful and have made a big, established aspect, but what did you want to be when you grew up?
Wow. For me, sport came at a time in my life where I needed it most. And so I feel forever indebted to sport, but I'm also a leader in sport. So I don't know if I ever saw myself in where I am right now. I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know it was something that existed. I just knew I liked sport. I like learning. I like people. I like working hard. And how does it all work together? What about you, Ted?
Yeah, I always wanted to do something in sports because I felt if I was doing that, then I technically really wouldn't have that hard a job. It'd be more of a passion than a job, and I've been fortunate.
And I don't necessarily think that I would have ever said that this is what I'd be doing. In fact, I entered university my freshman year as a film production major. So I'm an artist, and I thought that that's what I wanted to do. And but I loved exercising. I loved studying the topics in exercise science, and then it finally hit me that I was the guy who would make the neighbor kids work out with me at the gym, and I was 16 years old already coaching little league sports for other people's kids. And then I kind of realized like sports was the place for me, and I changed majors.
And I have a follow-up question. Like, what would you say the three of you, like, what connected the three of you? Obviously, like Ernie and Pat, I know you work together, but there's a reason that what connects the three of you?
Besides this podcast, I think it's the quest for knowledge. A mutual friend of Ted and I, Javar Gillette, who's with the Minnesota Timberwolves, basically approached me with an idea, and that is to, because I already was doing something in the podcast space, he thought it would be good to promote opportunities there are available in strength and conditioning and sports science. And it started with a conversation about doing a podcast with the three of us and Ted. And eventually Javar's path led him from the Houston Rockets to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And around that time is when I think Dr. Ernie Reimer was joining us here. And we just thought it would be a really good transition for the three of us to then take the podcast to the next step. And so here we are. That's my version.
Yeah.
That's kind of boring. There's no like
Yeah.
competitive edge or like a mutual interaction. You just pulled it all together.
Well, Ernie and I
Yeah, go
both
ahead,
had
Ted.
a conference together. Was it 2016 at the University of Washington?
I think we crossed paths even earlier than that. We both presented it in 2016 at the University of Washington, but I believe we actually crossed paths a little bit earlier than that, related to a basketball conference, possibly. But we first crossed paths.
Yeah.
It's been a while now.
Yeah. So I
And
think
then-
I had a lot of admiration for, Ernie during his presentation, and we've just kept in contact ever since that.
And Dr. Ivey, Pat, and me, I think we've had our first interaction circa 2015 or 16, and we were asked by, was it earlier than that? When we were
Before
asked to
that.
kind of do that team-based approach to sports performance and collegiate athletics, both of us were assembled. We were invited to be a part of a group of about 10 to 12 people, and it was primarily strength conditioning coaches. In that group, I was kind of the one outcast because I was the one person who didn't really like work in strength conditioning in the collegiate setting anymore, and I had different certifications than the rest of the group and things, and we all came together as a group and started brainstorming what a team-based approach to like sports performance looks like in collegiate athletics. And obviously there's more articulate names for that nowadays, like interdisciplinary approaches and high performance models and things, but that's how we first crossed paths, I believe.
Yes. Why do you ask those two questions?
Well, I mean, when you think about, well, one, there's a lot of podcasts. So why do people want to listen to all of you? And it takes us, I mean, 3 people on a podcast is a special, like, it's a, it takes a little bit of give and take. So the fact that you are all still doing it together, and typically, I know Ernie and Pat, when I chatted with you, it seems like you guys have a long withstanding friendship. I think that speaks to some of it. So it's always just interesting to hear, there's a lot of networking, and a lot of this field is about who you know and what relationships you have. And something valuable maybe your listeners can pick up on is how do you, what is it that made this relationship stick? I was just curious.
Yeah. I would like to make up a word right now and introduce it to the world. It's called respectship. I think we have a high level of respectship for each other. Be careful how you say that word, because yeah. But I think we have a high level of respect for one another, and when you have that, you value what the other person thinks, says, what their experiences are. So I don't know.
Now, Abbie, I'll ask you a question. In some of your research, you've used athletes, and you've also used, say, overweight adults. What's the biggest challenge when you're doing research with, different population groups?
Yeah, and I mean, you picked up a big part of my job is to bring in federal money to do research, and you can't bring in a lot of money to study athletes. And so a big interest of mine is actually to help people feel better and exercise. And so when we do general population, a lot of it is taking the same principles we would use to train an athlete, but these individuals don't know that it is okay to like have the pain. The exercise hurts good, hurts so good. And so it's kind of teaching them that, and then sticking around and helping them through that. Like, what does that feel like? What does consistency feel like? but it's a really easy sell. I'll be honest, like with the work that we do, we have to turn people away. So but it's like treating them as an athlete, as an individual, but just collecting data on them. So it's very much doing the same thing you all do with your athletes.
So most of us, like myself, Pat, Ted, I mean, we worked with individuals, they're highly motivated athletes. And what have you learned from working with non-athlete populations when it comes to motivation and exercise and consistency that could translate to the athletic population?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but one of the primary aims of my research is to identify very feasible exercise that works. I think one of the things that our field does a disservice of is like really push more is better. And that's not always the best. And so a lot of times with these people, it's really saying like, well, here's actually what you need to do to see results. And it's not exercise more and eat less. It's here's the evidence that you can do a few things and see results. And so to me, it goes back to education. Here's what the media tells you, here's what the science says, and here's the results and how it impacts your health. I think people really latch on to the education, whether they know they're doing it or not. We all kind of like to see the evidence. So one thing I have a question of, and I wasn't sure what we would talk about on this podcast because your listeners are very, and a lot of your guests have been very sports performance based, and I have a little bit of that, but I'm going to take it a little bit different. I'd love to, I think about where you all are at in your career and maybe the people that are listening and thinking about all of your experiences, and I'm hoping to glean something too. Like, what advice would you give to the people that are listening, whether it be you all have kind of different positions, administration, but you've, had that sport performance. Ernie, you definitely are doing some really great science. Ted, like I said, you're elusive, but you've impacted so many of the professional fields. I am totally different than all of you, yet we bring this like different view of knowledge that has intersected, I feel like. What advice would you give to people? So maybe Ernie, what would you say?
I think that every single one of us has something to offer from our past experiences and the knowledge that we bring to the table. So I personally am in favor of being a generalist, meaning that, yeah, I have some core competencies, but really I kind of approach work every day trying to solve problems. And that happens to be what a lot of other people do. They show up to work and they solve problems and they use their skill sets. But for me, that skill set just happens to be a scientific one. So I'm not that interested in trying to be an expert at any one thing. I'm just really interested in trying to find better ways to solve problems. And so my experience is the more diverse types of problems and challenges that we face and are able to overcome, I think makes us more versatile in a very complicated environment of athletics. So my advice to those who might be listening to become that generalist, so to speak, would be to start looking outside of their box a little bit. And if that's a weight room, like, go hang out with the athletic trainers for a little while. Go have lunch with your administrators or, the ticket salespeople. Go and start to pick their brains and find out what type of problems that they're solving, because they definitely have experience and knowledge. And if you can open up your mind to those things, I think we become a lot more versatile and valuable.
Ted, how about you?
I'm essentially a conduit between what research is out there and the different teams that I work with. And the key is understanding to translate that research into their actual workplace, knowing what would be practical and what wouldn't be practical. So I think having the insights to see what they do on a day-to-day basis within sports medicine, sports performance, sports nutrition, and then saying, this study found this, but it really doesn't have that much application to your particular setting. And I think, I think that the key is to understand when you read through a research paper, and then just try to come out with 4 bullet points that you can convey to, the groups that you're dealing with.
Yeah. I think in my background, I try to use my experiences as a good lens to see things. And so as a former student athlete, collegiate and professional, trying to ascend to be the best version of that I could be led me to understand that there is a science behind everything I needed in order to get to that goal. So whether it was food and nutritional sciences, whether it was physiology, lifting weights, running, conditioning, whether it was the mental side, I knew that there was something there, but not really knowing where to find those answers. So I wanted to jump higher, run faster. I wanted to be a better teammate. I wanted to win more games. I wanted to understand tendencies by the offense. Like, I wanted to understand when coaches would give us statistics, that was data. When the offense lines up in a certain formation, the tendency is to run this play. And so I was always fascinated by that, but I don't think many people look or think about sports science from the athlete's perspective. They look at sports science from the siloed perspective. Like, a lot of people think sports science is technology. And then you tell them, well, there's a mental side of sports science as well. And they may concede to that. Well, nutrition, there's a science base to that. Medical, doctors, there better be science at the foundation of that. I think from the athlete's perspective, they don't really separate all of these things out. We're asking them to deliver their very best in all of these areas, basically on demand. So my advice to a younger professional is to understand things from the athlete's perspective.
Like that.
What would your advice be, Abbie?
I think one of the key things that I think we all deal with is using your challenges to propel yourself. Like, I think a lot of us deal with challenges, especially as younger professionals, and of course we always deal with hard things, but it's using that to, and we do this as athletes, right? You get an edge, but it's almost taking it a little bit different. Like, what is the challenge trying to teach you? Or are you in listening? Like, are you meeting a challenge because you're going the wrong way? Or is it just because you need to figure out a different way or find the right, solve the problem a little bit differently? I just remember as a younger professional, there's always a lot of challenges and a lot of self-doubt, but that also can help you become better if you kind of see what the challenge that you're facing. And I think we do that, but a reminder that challenges are good and they can lead us to where we want to go, even if we don't know it. So
what was the biggest challenge in becoming a full-time professor that you didn't anticipate?
Oh, dang. I mean, let's be honest, I'm the only female on here. I also have 2 little kids, and exercise physiology is very male dominated, and I'm in the South. And so I remember going to my first NSCA conference, and I was like one of the only females, which it didn't really bother me. But then when I took my job here, I was 27. I mean, I didn't have kids at the time, but was one of maybe 3 other women. Just the idea of nobody can do it all, but how do you do the things you want to do and still, bear the female role, the mother role? Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing it very well, but I do think one of the things that I've seen for me personally is there weren't very many women doing what I was doing that had a family, was doing, you know, productive researcher and still doing the translation. And so that's part of my motivation to stay in the field, is that it can look lots of different ways. And even why I like doing this, like, you guys are all impacting people in a different way. And, you know, just the more diverse ways we can do that is we can overcome our challenges.
I noticed you were involved in several position papers in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition. Of those ones that you were have co-authored, which one have you found that is having the most impact on the student athletes there at North Carolina?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know about specifically here at UNC. I mean, I think it's hard to argue the science around nutrient timing, and the impact of that. So, and I think the ISSN position paper is one of the most concise and translatable into how that looks. So nutrient time, that would probably be the first one I would tell people to pick up and apply, which most people do, but it gives you a little science behind that.
Now, how about the athlete that understands the nutrient timing, but's trying to integrate intermittent fasting on top of that?
I would tell them to go talk to you all. Do not intermittent fast. Read the position paper on meal frequency and timing. It specifically talks about athletes and how they're about the only group that should have increased meal frequency and timing. So Ted, I have a question back to you. I noticed that you wrote a little, I don't know about little, but you didn't charge very much for your sport nutrition book. And Ernie, you bring up sport nutrition. I'd like to hear your favorite dietary supplement that you've taken, or the one that you kind of feel like is the most commonly brought up in conversation with your athletes.
Go ahead, Ernie.
If you want to start, yeah.
Yeah, so which one is brought up most often? Probably the thing I always hear about the most, which seems pretty commonplace, is like the pre-workout.
Which one do you bring up though? Not what people are asking. Like, which one would you provide some evidence on?
Yeah, so I'm pretty interested in, I've been interested in buffer capacity for a long time. So I would probably say beta alanine, although we can't provide that in this setting. But different things that can improve like your exercise capacity or prevent fatigue, I think I'm really interested in. And so I've always been pretty tuned into beta alanine for sure. I've got some really bad stories about testing like sodium bicarbonate with athletes, so we probably shouldn't share that on the podcast. Because there's some GI distress, so maybe I won't say much more than that. But we've been down those roads with elite athletes and things, and there's a lot of talk around different supplements. I would say that probably still need more research to support whether or not they're efficacious, because there's so many things along with supplements, but there's a lot of other things like different tertiary modalities that can suddenly magically help you just recover from the very strenuous exercise you just performed and magically adapt and heal within 24 hours and be ready. And so I'm genuinely interested in trying to debunk the myths around some of those supplements, along with maybe the tertiary recovery modalities that people might use if they just sleep better and they eat the right way and get plenty of rest and balance their training. Like, that's probably a better way to go.
I heard you used to carry your sodium bicarb on the airplane through TSA. Did you ever get caught doing that?
Oh, you heard about that? Actually, that was sodium citrate, actually. Okay. So after the sodium bicarbonate trials, So for the listeners, and 2 jobs ago, I was basically a pharmacist. Like I would be in the lab and I would pack my own gel caps. I'd go get gel caps from the pharmacy and we'd pack them up with the supplements we were trying to test with our elite athletes. That was in a setting where testing positive was the only rule we couldn't break. And so the athletes had some GI distress to sodium bicarbonate. So we
How
had
come you sugarcoat it? You don't want people to know like what happens when you have sodium bicarb?
Well, we did some really intense trials, and some athletes were literally had like diarrhea and they were throwing up at the same time. So
I think that's important to share. You know, you don't want to just go dabble in your baking soda.
yeah, but they were willing to go for it though. They gave it a shot. I believe we even did some sodium bicarbonate and caffeine trials simultaneously. But because of the GI distress, we had found some research and we were looking at the chemical sodium citrate. And there was a chance that it might have some buffer capacity properties without the GI distress. So yeah, I had to bring about 20 pounds of sodium citrate to Europe, and I packed it. I didn't want it to break in my luggage to Europe, and so I packed it into a biohazard bag, like a big biohazard bag, which has really strong like plastic walls. So I was like, I'm gonna like put this in 2 biohazard bags, and I'm gonna wrap it up. And then they searched my bag, and there's like a big bag full of powder, white powder with a big biohazard symbol in it. So that obviously didn't go over too well with the airport security, but they took the powder from me and they still let me fly to Europe. So I made it to Europe. I just didn't get to bring the sodium citrate with me.
A lot of my early work was with beta alanine. So my very first few publications. So I studied with Jeff Stout, and we were one of few labs in the US that did any of that work, kind of followed by Roger Harris. So I'm a big fan of beta alanine use, but nobody usually takes it correctly. So the loading dose is pretty efficacious.
Yeah, so we interacted with Dr. Stout quite a bit at that time on making sure we were properly dosing that, and we wanted to make sure we had like NSF certified products and everything. So we put a lot of time and effort into that, and I've since abandoned a lot of that work because now that I work in the NCAA, it's not like we can just readily give that to athletes. And I just wish there was a pathway that we could maybe make some recommendations to certain athletes that they could get the right stuff and get on the right dosage and stuff. But that's always a bit taboo with NCAA compliance.
So for the non-NCAA athlete, what is the proper dosing?
You want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Well, it's one of a few supplements that you actually need to load with. And usually the loading requires 4 to 6 grams in divided doses. So if you're doing time release, it's 2 grams a couple times a day for at least 3 weeks. And so many people are getting beta alanine in pre-workout. And that's not something I would recommend. But if you do take a pre-workout, you at least need a couple more doses throughout the day. And then it usually stays in your system. It increases muscle carnosine and is elevated for up to 14 weeks. So it's not one of those things that you need to take regularly. You can kind of cycle on, cycle off. And
so muscle carnosine is a dipeptide protein, which is beta alanine, and the other amino acid is L-histidine, I believe. Mm-hmm. And the only thing to be aware of, like, so when people take pre-workout and they tell you their skin itches, and there's likely beta alanine in that pre-workout because it causes paresthesia. Hopefully I said that correctly, but it makes your skin itch.
Yeah, and if you take it at smaller doses and with food, it's not as bad. And the time release now, like a long time ago, they didn't have time release, but the paresthesia is not harmful. Some people like it because they think it's working.
Do you know if there have been any studies on any types of foods that offer buffering capacity?
I mean, in general, that's why we do high intensity exercise, is because we naturally increase our buffering capacity. And so then if you think about, if we think about just a derivative of beta alanine, we get that through eating meat. So a dipeptide, those things will increase those dipeptides to then allow us to create more carnosine. So usually it's through fish and chicken and beef. But that, to me, that's where the dietary supplements come in. I could either have my normal dietary protein intake plus an additional 6 chicken breasts, or I can have my normal dietary protein and a couple grams of beta alanine. Maybe cheaper too nowadays.
I think there was some, you could, I believe there was some research looking at ketogenic diets and that people's resting pH was reduced, and which wouldn't be good if you're a high-powered athlete.
I would wonder too, is if that would also be associated with the loss of muscle. Like anytime you lose muscle, you're going to lose muscle carnosine and change the pH. But I don't know that literature off the top of my head.
Yeah. The other thing I'll see in with some of the teams I visit is to follow up on your sodium bicarbonate is not loading, but it's serial dosing. And there's been some research more with female athletes, and you'll see teams that will just drop an Alka-Seltzer Gold in their Gatorade and sip that throughout practice, particularly for their highly twitched guys, that at the end of a 2-hour practice, they think it may have some beneficial effects on keeping pH in a more favorable zone. So it's not loading. And I think the way it's been titled in the research is serial dosing. So if you just take a small amount throughout the week, you retest in these particular studies with the female basketball players, and they go through a series of agility drills that their buffering capacity at the end of the week was improved without any of the GI distress. But the other supplement that I get asked about is cannabis, and all the different products are out there, lotions, creams, gummies, and because it's there's an agreement with the NFL and the NFLPA that significant amount of money has been forwarded for research looking at that as alternatives for pain mediation. But the facts are, I don't think most players that engage in cannabis are doing it for medicinal purposes, but they can use that as their excuse. But
I think the quality is hard to control at this point, right? So I think that is one of the things that is in my mind a big question. And if it works though, you still don't know what you're getting versus what the different forms, but huge area right now.
Yes.
What about that versus CBD? And what does the research say? Regular cannabis versus CBD as far as pain management or any buffer capacity or anything like that.
Ted, what do you got to tell us? I don't know much about this.
It's sort of, I just had to send one team. They just wanted some research, looking at the aspects of recovery. And you can look, there's some studies that will show, taking the THC out, that, it can reduce muscle soreness. But you also find another study. There was one in Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise that used an oil to look at reductions in muscle damage from eccentric exercise, and they didn't find a significant advantage of using the product. There have been some looking at joint pain, and a lot of times it's subjective. And so I don't know if they're doing double blind. Well, they say, oh yeah, it felt a lot better since I was using this. And then you look at the neuroprotective effects of those particular supplements. And there is some research to show it can have a neuroprotective effect after traumatic brain injury.
Doesn't it show the opposite too, though? Like a neurodegenerative effect or like a memory cognition? So it's like, well,
oh yeah.
What is it?
There's one team I know that has data from since 2013, and the players that were chronic smokers had 3 times the duration recovery time from a concussion. So it's there's no clear-cut research with regard to that because there's just a lot of variables.
Well,
The
it's
kids-
hard to study, right? What university or institution will allow you to study something like that?
Well, I think you'd have a lot of volunteers that they're currently doing it. So I don't think it'd be hard to find subjects.
I was thinking more about the regulatory controls of that.
Don't worry about those.
I don't think people realize the length of time and hurdles that is. Dr. Pat, what about you? You were an NFL athlete and you work in sport. What's your kind of supplement insight? How do you remain jacked? I don't know how old you are, but you're still jacked. You have science on your side. It's not fair.
Well, I think I do have some routines. I do use a supplements from a company called Thorne. And so I have to start with a probiotic, like I have to. Multivitamin, using omega-3. What else? Maybe some glucosamine, some collagen, turmeric, vitamin C. And that's about it. And I think maybe in the last 2 weeks, I started some creatine again, but I haven't used creatine in probably years, 2 or 3 years. So I'm just wanted to see what happens using that. But I really focus on staying hydrated, drinking a lot of water, or club soda water with a lime, fruits and vegetables, as much lean protein as possible. I try to, and I try to, you can see behind me, I'm here in a weight room. So I'm in my basement. So I try to work out. I try to keep my cardio up and be consistent.
I was just going to say, are you trying to tell us that consistency is key?
Consistency, having a routine is important. I think that's more important than anything is consistency. And that's not saying you have to be perfect. I think consistency allows you to have a lifestyle that you can enjoy. So I don't cut anything out unless it's something I just can't process, like onions, if anybody knows me. And being lactose intolerant. So just working around those two things, and trying to make the best possible decisions as much as possible. I think that helps. So let me see. What about Ernie? What do you do?
I'm not as consistent with a formal exercise regimen as you are, but what I can say is that I am a pretty consistent men's baseball player, and so a lot of the things that I do around the year will actually be to make sure I can still play baseball. So I'll catch probably the seasons aren't as long here in Kentucky as they were in Salt Lake, but since I've been here 2 seasons now, it's probably catch maybe 20 games and then play outfield another 10 to 15, maybe 20 games. And it's fun because it is actually difficult. We to share an anecdote, we have a new strength conditioning coach who was a former college catcher. And by the way, if anyone here has ever played baseball and you're in the Kentucky area and want to be on my team, like, I'm always recruiting. But he said that he wanted to play men's baseball, and he's a strength conditioning coach. And so sometimes the strength conditioning coaches will give me some grief because I don't like to spend a lot of time in the weight room anymore. But he caught 5 innings, no big deal. I mean, just 5, not a complete game. And he was absolutely smashed and never came back. I won't say any names. He knows who he is. I'm trying to recruit him to come back this year.
I don't think that's working.
but it does take a little bit to be able to do that. And so I do take pride in being my age and having caught 20 to 35 games a year for the last 15 years. And, so at least I'm in good enough shape to keep doing that.
I heard you have a special liking to the martial arts. Did you have some sort of dojo that you?
Yes. So I happen to be pretty interested in throwing metal blades like ninja stars and knives, and so if anyone ever wants to have a throwing star or a knife throwing contest with me, just let me know.
You'll bring the white powder and the knives. Good to know.
Yeah, bring the white powder, the knives, and maybe
Some
a catcher's mitt
AC/DC
and
based on your
a baseball bat.
Okay. Ted,
What
what's your
about you?
secret?
Oh, I would say I follow with Pat. It's consistency. I travel a lot, so I'm typically, get up 4 or 5, get the workout in, and then get on with my day. So, try to, fend off sarcopenia. So
No supplements for you?
I do some turmeric, probiotic, and multi.
Okay.
Just
How are
vitamin
you?
D.
I haven't done the Alka-Seltzer Gold yet with my my Gatorade. So
What about you, Abbie?
Oh, what about me? I mean, my students always give me a hard time that I have science on my side. So I don't have to work out as long as I used to. I was a collegiate distance runner, but I've always liked to lift heavy things. I probably can't swear on here, so I'll stick with things. So I do HIIT a few times a week, lift heavy things. I do some long runs on the weekend, but consistency. Sometimes it's just 20 minutes a day. I have 2 little kids. And then I'm a big fan of supplements because I love whole foods and I cook a lot, but it's hard to eat when you got, I start my day around 4 and you just go. So usually some sort of protein powder, like a whey isolate, a probiotic, especially when I travel, vitamin D, magnesium, usually at night, an omega-3. Those would be my key ones. And then creatine. I that's a big area of research of mine. So just 5 grams a day. And then there's some really fascinating science that I've been kind of dabbling in with nootropics, adaptogens. So I don't know about you all, but one of the impacts of COVID I saw is just like this ability or inability, maybe. I've always been a multitasker, but this like processing, you have like 8 tabs open, plus my home to-do list, plus what I need to do next. Nootropics, there's some adaptogens like rhodiola, phosphatidylserine. There's some cool ingredients with some science coming out that really help with focus, which is really helpful for me as as you're writing papers or teaching or something. So I think that's pretty cool. I'll do that once in a
while. When you're dealing with an athlete that is, let's say, burning a ton of calories, and they're also, on, say, ADD medicine, and they just have no appetite, what are some of your recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, usually if it's an appetite issue and you're trying to get calories in, usually a higher fat intake is a better way to go. So, easy swaps from low fat to higher fat, or just increasing nuts and seeds or oils, because then it's not changing, the volume of food and their habits. It's just changing the calorie content. But a lot of it, depends. And then maximizing that food around the exercise can make the most impact. So liquids versus solids, if possible.
I have a question. When it comes to taking your research, the knowledge that you have, the experiences you have, knowing how they can have a positive impact with sport, and us working in collegiate athletics, there's sometimes a barrier, and this is not about one particular school or another, but there's a barrier up for those who do the studying, the research, and then those who are involved in the practical application, whether they acknowledge that research or not. And the purpose of this podcast is to help people to see the bridge. And the bridge is the people and conversations and some respect for one another and what we do. I guess if you could wave a magic wand, what would change so that we're contributing to each other at a better rate, higher level? Like, what does that look like to you?
Gosh, I love this question. I mean, I think this is originally why I reached out to you and Ernie. And some of it, well, one, I really want to read the paper Ernie mentioned that you all are putting together about, some structure of sports science. But one is to be a continual learner. I think, the more we learn, there's a lot of people in our field that are not very humble. And I mean, we're all insecure in our own ways, but I think those insecurities show through of like, oh, I know everything, I don't need your help. And we really need to be the opposite, recognize that we all have our own strengths. And I think we all need to be better communicators. So part of it is not, even in this scenario, and even when I talked to you guys initially, is like, how can I ask the right question to get the right knowledge from you that can then inform the research that we do? Not because I want to, take ownership of the research, so that I can do research that can have better, translation to practice. And so it really is, lower egos, knowing what you do know, knowing what you don't know. And I think some of it too is being vulnerable. Sitting in a scenario like this, I think most of us come up in this world of like, we have to know our shit and hold it together. Like but really it's saying like, this is what I don't know. Like, yes, I have CSCS credentials, but that doesn't mean I know necessarily the best techniques to apply that. What are you doing in the weight room that then can inform what I'm doing, and vice versa? But rarely do those conversations being had, and I think there's lots of reasons, but I would a lot of times say it's ego, communication, job insecurity, or insecurity in general. And we were meant to be strong people and, do it on our own. I think that those strengths of ours also get in the way in this field. What would you guys say? Pat, what would you say, since you asked me the question and you're in kind of been in all of those avenues?
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to address, but it's not as easy and as smooth or seamless as even when you're trying to build a bridge or open a door or extend an invitation. Those insecurities, ego issues, those, people not feeling that they'll have control, they may lose control. And some people don't want to do more. Some people don't want to do more. So I think that we've been able to knock down some of those barriers. But it's either systems or people that you have to figure out how to maneuver around. And if you have the right people or enough of the right people, you can figure out how to adjust the system. When the system itself does not necessarily necessitate the path, you have to find the right people to get on your side and create a good team to then, I guess, attack the system that doesn't allow for that easy flow of communication, if that makes any sense. That's the first time I think I've tried to really articulate that, so I'm sure I butchered it.
Well, I think one thing you're saying is, I'm not building a weight room, I'm building a team, and it comes down to finding good people. And I think that goes back to the advice, like, be a good person, and that's easier said than done. It's really like, how do you live out your values and share those in a common ground? And I think it's the same case in this world, how we would, do that. And it's sometimes there's less good people that can create those, bridges.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Ernie?
Yeah, sometimes I try not to think of it in terms of like whether they are good people or not, because even the people you may perceive who aren't good people, they have really strong relationships with a lot of people. I mean, they've got their network, and there's a lot of people who are fond of them. So So I think it's about building the relationship and truly trying to understand each other's worlds so that we can benefit from working together. And so a lot of it comes down to being empathetic to the problem statements and the needs of each other, and then trying to say, hey, here's the niche that we have to where we can, where our universes can come together and provide a mutual benefit. And that's really tough. Not everyone is open and willing to do that, but I would say one of our goals and one of the things that we're constantly trying to do is to bring researchers into the applied world, to bring the applied world closer to research and try to bridge that gap. So it's challenging. But what I would say is it's not like the constraints are not on just one side, meaning that there's, I can tell you from my PhD and the studies I was trying to do and wanted to do, the constraints that I ran up to with some of my faculty committee, because, hey, that's too applied. There's too many unknown, uncontrolled variables there. And my answer is like, yeah, but it's not real life. And so even on like the, when you go to the faculty side, there's going to be resistance to doing certain things because maybe it's not scientifically rigorous enough, or the study design isn't robust enough, or there's all these issues with it. And then on the sports side of it, it would be, well, that like we can't budge, and that's just not going to be feasible for us. That thinking isn't going to work in this environment. So you get these different camps, and so I think that in a way, both sides are responsible for the void, so to speak, and therefore I think that it's going to take people on both sides to change, to truly build that bridge in a way that the bridge isn't going to collapse.
Well, and I wonder too, like, I mean, something that you said that I think a lot about is everyone is so busy, it has to be somewhat mutually beneficial, and defining those outcomes can be hard to do. So like, you talk about the faculty side, like, well, what benefit, not necessarily direct benefit, but how does it benefit the science versus, from the athletic side of what does this extra time and measurement mean for me as a, in athletics. So I think defining those outcomes is sometimes a moving scale that can help some of those relationships.
And we're getting better at those conversations, but I think it comes down to an understanding that your goals as a researcher are never going to be the same as our goals in the athletics department. However, what if there are ways that you can benefit us and ways that we can benefit you, to where we can achieve independent goals by working together? Right. And I think the art of it is to truly know what your initiatives and your goals are and what you would seek from a collaboration or a partnership, and then in the same accommodating what our goals and needs may be. So if it's working with a faculty member and you have a certain sport who has some data and they really want to just answer a specific question from that, and if the faculty says, yeah, we can help analyze that data and with that data management and help answer that very specific question you're trying to ask, but could we also use this data for research purposes? And we don't care about the research, and they may actually answer a different question from that data, but it's sometimes, if that answer is yes, then it's kind of a win-win. People's goals are being met. And that may not be the best example, but what I'm really just trying to say is that it just comes down to an understanding to say, what would you want in return to, work with us, to collaborate with us, and everyone to be really forthright on what it is you want to get out of the collaboration, and then become mutual partners. So it truly is a two-way street.
Ted, how about you? Any insight?
My situation's a little different. What I try to do is create like a flow chart of particular topics. Let's just say it's, brain injury, or who are the top 5 people that I can call if I have a question on that. So, now if I look at supplementation, I just added another name to my flow chart, and that's you. So I do that on all these topics. And so when I travel around, I always try to make time to take somebody to the breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's part of that, that arm of, brain talent that I can suck dry to get some information that ultimately can help me communicate information on that topic. So it's not necessarily, it's knowing where to find that and create those relationships. And, mine expands each year. I establish relationship with this guy that's, he's a neurologist, and, we email once a week, because I'll send him information on topics that interest him, but that's not really in his wheelhouse. And that, he really appreciates that. So it's just not as Ernie said, it's not a one-way street. So whoever I try to create relationships with, I've got to make sure I bring something to the table as well. And that takes time to understand that person. And it takes work, but it's very enjoyable. Because now your network just expands.
Abbie, I think my role is unique, being an administrator of health and performance. It allows me to work with different departments, and the nature of my position is to get those departments to work seamlessly and integrated with one another. So reaching out to campus and professors and deans, that's a part of the role of being a leader in athletics. So I think it helps us to be able to navigate some of those, pitfalls that may exist in other places and places that I've been as well previously. I think just being in a position to listen and learn, and then just call a meeting and have different people from different backgrounds come together, I think it's pretty unique. I think it gives us an advantage. And I think having people in an athletics department with a research background helps as well, because you understand IRB and data collection and de-identification, and I think that helps.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing, we talked about outcomes and stuff, but one of the beauties of things like this and being able to have some open conversations is sometimes you don't know what the outcome is. Sometimes it is, bringing people together that have different viewpoints and having those conversations, and that's how innovation happens. But I feel like that's a lot of times what doesn't happen, is getting the, allowing us to have some of those conversations. And Ernie, I think you said something that was really, it gave me a different perspective. You said there's lots of difficult people, and I totally agree with that. And they bring a lot of value, but it also, I found over my time, is those aren't always the people that are most effective to work with. It's almost like, what do you take, like, maybe sometimes not all relationships work, especially when you're trying to do things that are hard. And so it's finding the people that are less difficult and open to those conversations. And I think it does come back to open-minded, open discussions, even now, to allow for those, what are those outcomes? What are the next steps, especially in our field, because it's always changing. New approaches, new techniques, new supplements, like how do we continually evolve? Even the athletes changing.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you said some important words in there, like innovation and continually evolve. I think too, yeah, I agree with you that not everyone out there who you might have a good relationship with would be a good partner to go and collaborate with, to innovate and evolve together with. But innovation and evolution, it really, it comes with a lot of bumps and unknowns and a lot of barriers. And so you have to be pretty comfortable with, tripping up and running into barriers and having to recalibrate, not actually knowing what the end result's going to be. So you have to, if you're focused on innovation and trying to evolve and help the profession grow or help your system, your operation grow, you truly do have to be comfortable with the fact that maybe you don't have the answers, but together we'll find answers. We're probably going to run into a lot of adversity along the way, and barriers and hiccups and paperwork and red tape and all of these things. But if we can roll up our sleeves together and go through it, then we may actually be able to accomplish some pretty cool things. So I think sometimes we lose sight of how difficult the path really is. And I think one thing that can happen and strain the ability to collaborate is that most people come in thinking it's easy, but it isn't, especially when you're trying to innovate. It really isn't easy. And you put together the best team you have to try to find the answers. But if everyone has the answers, then innovation wouldn't be in the dictionary. And if everyone had the answers, then we wouldn't have championships, because everyone would be a champion, right? So I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I think that's critical when it comes to finding the right people to work with. Is you also have to just be willing to go along the journey together toward whatever those common goals may be.
One thing I'd say that, like, as you're talking and thinking, well, that's what we do as mentors. Like, isn't that the best part of mentorship? Is then a lot of times the people that we are mentoring are the ones that become more innovative. Like, they see the path and then they bring a fresh mind. And so I know one thing, as anyone that's listening, is find a good mentor and learn the way that way is always really helpful.
I agree with that. And oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead, Darren.
One thing though, but I actually see that like for me, like my mentors aren't just like people who are older and more wise and that I report to. I mean, like a researcher in your lab is a mentor to me on certain issues. And so I kind of see mentors as people who are beside me, beneath me, above me. They're all around. And I think if you can take a moment to recognize how much everyone around you can actually have a positive influence on you, like it allows for a lot of growth.
100%. Lots of different types of mentors.
So Abbie, as we wrap it up here, for our listeners there, what would be some books you might recommend to them that you might be reading yourself and have found to be very, insightful?
I don't know what that comment means, but one book, actually, I don't know, there's this that I'm reading right now. It's called You Thrive. You can't see it. How to Succeed College and Life. It is written by like a psychologist. It's very fascinating. Anyone in college should read it. And college sport. It just talks about like the whole body, the mind. It's a very easy, quick read. Another one that I just finished that I love, it's called Strength for Strength. And it talks about how we have two happiness curves in life. And the first curve is all about striving, and the happiest people in life are the ones that learn to go from that striving curve to a wisdom curve. And it's been really insightful for me as I've like transcended this full professor. I'm not 40 yet now. Like, what am I want to be when I grow up? But it's really like, how do you use your experiences to give back? And so it's been really insightful. I think the other just nugget from that book, it talks about how we all peak in our career based on the field. And I think sometimes we don't want to talk about peaking, but it's peaking in a way of like switching from one curve to the next. And it was really like insightful to think about how we would just live our lives slightly different. So those are two that I would recommend. You guys have any good ones? I love books.
Which one am I reading? It's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a really good book. It's about the holistic medical care philosophy. So I can't remember the name of it. I have to make sure I include it in the show notes. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. So thank you so much, Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan. We've been excited to have you. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Good to chat with you all.
Thank you.